Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news, and amid a hectic qualifying session at the Austrian Grand Prix, Toto, Wolff and Mercedes are frustrated that the technical directive has been delayed to the Belgian Grand Prix as the drama with regard to the porpoising issue and the flexi floor potentially that Red Bull are using has kicked off to a new level, with Christian Horner though saying from the Red Bull side that Toto Wolff is speaking total rubbish. Very much intrigued your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy, subscribe if you're new as always, plenty to discuss today. Of course, some teams bringing small upgrades. We saw Mercedes say they brought some upgrades, but they have got a long night ahead of them, most certainly. We'll discuss here in a few minutes time. But yeah, some teams trying to bring some tweaks. Generally, the Red Bull is incredibly good around the kind of Red Bull ring here in Spielberg because, well, apparently even as a kind of Helmut Marko said yesterday, the turbocharger, whatever they have, just works really well at these kind of higher altitudes. Of course, well, some power units that weren't working so well was in Bottas's car. He's going to start from the back of the grid on Sunday. That does not mean, though, that he can't start where he is in the sprint race tomorrow. So it's a sprint weekend. There's only FP1, then quali straight away. Then it goes into the sprint race tomorrow, of course, and then at the actual race itself on Sunday. Now, this was going on before everything kicked off, and apparently this kind of, well, went overboard and got delayed a little bit. You can see a lot of FIA people here, the team principals, Mattia Binotto, Christian Horner's right here, Toto Wolff in the background. They were all having a discussion fundamentally over budget cap, I believe, and then in addition, over the new technical directive, which was meant to be introduced from France and is now getting pushed back even further. They, I think, were initially trying to bring it in from Montreal. Then they said, okay, let's just leave it a couple of races till we understand the issues more, and now it's getting delayed even further, which seemingly plays into the hands of Red Bull and probably Ferrari as well, at least from the Mercedes perspective. But Christian Horner says they are doing nothing wrong at all. So first of all, the kind of tweaks here that were going on in that meeting were about financial regulations. There is kind of something in place that says if the inflation is over 3%, there is a provision for that in the regulations, that effectively the budget cap can be raised, as we believe it has, by 3.1% now, which is equivalent to, maybe $4 or so million, something in that ballpark, right? So yes, it's going to offset to some degree the additional kind of energy expenses and kind of travel and shipping costs that the team are dealing with. But well, some teams have been pushing very hard for this. Red Bull, Mercedes, even like Christian Horner said that if it doesn't come through, they won't be able to finish the season because the costs will be too high. I'm sure like they would have found a raise around that, but the top teams want to keep developing their car. This kind of increase in the budget gap is certainly going to help them. But the other part of this kind of talking point was about this new technical directive, which is initially the kind of big talking point about it was that it's there to reduce the porpoising, and kind of it looked like Mercedes were going to suffer most from this. But there's now second part to this technical directive coming through with regard to the flexi floors that Mercedes believes both Red Bull and Ferrari have been using. Now, Verstappen says that he actually believes that it's the Mercedes floor which is the most flexible, which may well be true, but not in the specific cases that Mercedes are looking at. So what they have said is that this technical directive relating to the porpoising and potentially the flexi floors has been delayed to now the Belgian Grand Prix. So it was meant to come out in 2 weeks' time in France, and Mercedes were thinking, okay, fantastic news. Austria generally doesn't suit Mercedes that well typically, but who knows what could happen around Paul Riccardo. They were probably thinking, okay, it comes through, Red Bull have a couple of weeks really to fix their car or whatever might be going on. Of course, it's only currently rumours, but some people have certainly been looking at what it might be. This is a kind of an explanation if you guys are unfamiliar with the situation here. So as you can see here on the Red Bull from the underside, there are two pieces of material here, right? There's one piece, there's a second piece. Now, Mercedes said when they saw this, or it was being rumoured, like one of their engineers said, Andrew Chauvelin, like, it's kind of shocking that we didn't exploit this ourselves, but Mercedes are going to give credit to other teams. If Mercedes had thought about doing this, I'm sure they would have done it themselves. But Red Bull and Ferrari seemingly both have done, and you can kind of see that there's two separate sections here because the flexibility of this plank is only tested at the front, and I think it has to deflect by less than 1mm right at the front and then less than 2mm here. But towards the back, it's actually not tested, despite the regulations implying that it should only flex by 2mm the entire way. They only tested it at the front, so it's really the fault of the FIA for allowing this in the regulations. But by teams allowing it to flex more at the back, they can effectively reduce the wear that this part takes and also seemingly raise the rate to reduce porpoising while retaining downforce. So there's a few benefits to this could have. And if you look at the Mercedes right here, they effectively just have one plank, it seems. Like we finally got to saw the underside of their car when, of course, Russell crashed. We had more chances to do so today when, of course, well, a few crashes as we will look at here in a second. But yes, it does seem like from some images that Ferrari and Red Bull are probably exploiting this kind of hole in the rules, which Mercedes are kind of hoping it would be fixed quickly, but it's actually going to drag on a few races, I suppose, to give Red Bull the time, in essence, to actually fix their car or, make the plank only out of one piece or whatever exactly they want to do. Now, of course, Christian Horner says that none of this is even true and it's all rumours, which might well be the case, but of course, he now does a fair amount of time to actually make sure it does comply to the regulations and then pretend nothing was wrong to start with, despite the fact that, there seems to be some evidence why this might well be the case, but it's not all across the board. out. This I thought was rather interesting, the kind of average time gains by the teams so far this year. Mercedes have made some progress, but they were expecting to make much more when this comes into effect, which it now will do from Belgium in August to we've got the French Grand Prix, got this Grand Prix, of course, the French Grand Prix, the Hungaroring, and then it goes to Belgium, I believe. So there's a couple of races additionally now for Red Bull, Ferrari, whoever's doing this, to sort this out and potentially alleviate any issues it might have caused if they had to effectively remove it overnight, or, you know, even if that's the case as they say it is not, right? So that's the question as it is currently ongoing, but it probably does play into Red Bull's hands, the fact that they have time to maybe think around other solutions here or whatever the case might be. But Mercedes, of course, kind of frustrated. Toto Wolff actually said, right here, I'll share the brief clip from the end of this where he says, you know, I was kind of hoping it would come in a little bit sooner. And then Christian Horner responding, right? So he's effectively denying that there's anything wrong with this car and saying it fully complies and saying that, you know, he doesn't really know what Toto Wolff is talking about. So maybe some other teams he's kind of mentioning here, but he said it's total rubbish what Toto Wolff is talking about here.
Do you think some teams are circumnavigating the rules with some skid blocks?
Yeah, I think so.
Who?
Wait, I don't know. I haven't been able to squeeze the skids of certain teams.
Yeah, but you know.
Yeah, well, I'm looking at our competitors, and probably, you know, I would have wished that the TD comes in a little bit earlier, but it is what it is. So after Spa, in Spa, we won't see that anymore.
It does appear that some have less bouncing because they do have a flexible part of their floor, if you like, a softer part of the floor that means that they're not affected by this.
Total rubbish.
Okay.
Total rubbish. The floor, I think we're getting issues mixed up.
Okay.
You know, here. So.
So does your floor, do you have any concerns about your floor? Because Toto said some of his competitors he thinks are doing it.
Zero. I mean, I don't know, maybe he's referring to I don't know, you know, cars that are around him at the moment. I have no idea, but absolutely no issues or concerns on our floor.
So it has been a good few months since we've had a bit of spicy Red Bull versus Mercedes action. It does seem like as soon as Mercedes are kind of back in the hunt for victories, pole positions, whatever, you know, straight away Christian Horner, you could see he was going on full attack mode. Like, he got asked the question, you could just tell he was going to throw a dagger in. You know, he relishes the opportunity really to throw some digs in at Mercedes where he gets the chance to. Honestly, like, last year was just so kind of spicy and bitty, and they're all going at each other's necks every single weekend. This year, like, the Red Bull versus Ferrari title fight has been much more reserved, and honestly, the last few races hasn't really been much of a fight, to be honest, between Max Verstappen and the rest. So, you know, it just goes to show that Mercedes and Red Bull is really where the drama lies. And, you know, once they get back on kind of similar-ish terms, then stuff like this and sparks start to fly once again. So this kind of sums it up. 3.1 inflation allowance on the cost cap agreed. Technical directive pushed back to the Belgian Grand Prix. So probably this falls into Red Bull's hands. But still, Toto Wolff says, look, better late than never, I suppose. But then again, if it does come in from Belgium, like if they push it back already, who knows if they don't have a meeting before Belgium and say, you know, let's just push it back to Abu Dhabi, right? And then, of course, it never happens for the season. So that, of course, is the kind of big question mark going around right now. Let's talk free practice 1 and quali. Interesting qualifying, generally because, well, firstly, the FP1, because the Haas guys were absolutely flying, right? The Haases were honestly on crack today. Don't exactly know what they did to their car because they have said they're not really making any updates. A lot of teams that have made upgrades have not made really any progress at all. And Haas, who effectively have the same car here that they had in Bahrain, are now looking rather competitive once again. It's kind of incredible to see, actually, especially because they say they weren't really making any changes. I guess they've just kind of refined what they had. But again, Red Bull's certainly the fastest car in free practice 1 with Verstappen at the helm, and that this would only continue kind of throughout the day, but still the Mercedes was here and there or thereabouts pretty much the entirety of qualifying as well, until of course Q3, which was keenly of note. Now, both McLarens had torrid days. First of all, there was an issue with Norris's power unit. It was actually his new one. They just put a new power unit in his car ahead of this Grand Prix, and he comes into the first FP1 session, and like halfway through the session, the engine starts catching fire. There's some heat under Lando, and he says, you know, I've got to pull off and stop and get out of it, right? And for quali, they actually changed it around and put this old power unit back in. So not a good sign at all for McLaren, and that's the thing. These are kind of reliability issues. They are going to turn the tide of the kind of 4th place situation in this championship, and right now Alpine are absolutely coming for blood right now, especially based on their performances since Silverstone. And Riccardo, very difficult day for him once again. Like, Lando didn't have a much easier time either. Makes it into Q2, but after that has a pretty tough time, can't break the car, and ends up P15 with Norris P16. And this is not a stat that Lando will want to hear about. The 11th race of each of the last 3 seasons, he's ended up with a DNF. And honestly, the way this weekend has gone so far, you wouldn't be surprised if it's a similar story for Lando this weekend. So yes, strange coincidence, to be honest. And here we are, the 11th race of 2022, and you can't rule it out at the present time. Q1, Riccardo's out. Both Aston Martins, honestly, like, they just go so far backwards. It's incredible. If Vettel Vettel doesn't retire at the end of this year, I will presently be surprised. Unfortunate for Zhou, he couldn't make it out either. The Alfa Romeo did seem a bit of a handful for him. He's been doing so well the last few qualifying, and of course the last race was tough for him, so we didn't really have a race right. He was off at the first corner 5 seconds into the race, so hopefully he can rebound from that, but maybe of course the sprint race is there tomorrow. That's the thing with the sprint race. It does allow teams that have had poor qualifyings to make the comeback. It's what happened in Imola with, I think, Sainz and Perez both had tough qualifyings on the Friday. They made the comeback in the sprint race to effectively erase any of their deficits. It might be a similar story for some of these drivers that have had tough times today, especially of course the Mercedes guys. Now I mean, look, Riccardo again, really tough time, but in fairness, it's not like Lando was too much further up the road. He was only P15, and both Hasses through to Q3. Remarkable scenes. Congratulations to this team really in general right now for putting this on. And then Mercedes tweeted this out, right? Because every session, like, Hamilton was even the fastest car during Q2 for quite some time, and then Leclerc, I believe, pipped him at the end. But Mercedes looked like they were going to be there, especially Lewis Hamilton. He was absolutely bombing it. He was like really within a tenth, 2/10 of the top times of the Ferraris. There was a good chance Hamilton could have put it at least, you know, maybe front row on a good day, on a fantastic lap, maybe second row. I think it was very plausible for Mercedes, which would have been, of course, one of the best qualifying performances so far this year. And Perez and Sainz, for a time, Perez especially, was very much struggling. He honestly really shouldn't have got out of Q2 because it was very clear that he went off track limits. They didn't discount the lap, and then they're investigating out after the fact, so that's a bit of a strange one. But it did look like Mercedes actually had a shout here in a track that doesn't tend to suit them particularly well, at least in previous seasons. It's not been a great one for them. They had a shout for pole position, kind of out of nowhere, which I'm sure was a bit of a surprise, and Toto Wolff was pretty happy with it, right? And then, of course, the drivers were going hell for leather to try and make that happen, and both of them, within just a few minutes of each other, went off the track. You very rarely see qualifying mistakes from Hamilton. He goes off on one of the, fast corners, like he gets the power down a bit too early, the rear end goes out, and that's it for him. And it's the same thing that happens to Russell a few corners later, so obviously going to be a very long night here for Mercedes. Not sure how bad the damage was. It didn't look great, to be honest, because it was kind of a side shunt. It may have screwed up the front suspension, most certainly, and more, maybe the gearbox is having issues as well. But both cars with very similar issues. The rear stepping out when they didn't want it to definitely raises a question as to whether they change anything, really, the Mercedes team, because the same thing happened to Russell on the final corner. I was watching the cars go around this final corner all day, and I was like, someone's going to spin him eventually, because just the way they were sending it in there, the car looks so unsettled. If you get down on the power slightly too soon, you're going to spin the rear ends, and both Mercedes seemed very kind of prone to that when they were really pushing on that Q3 lap. So they both find themselves out of qualifying. Russell ends up P5, although because he did walk over the track despite the red flag, he's getting investigated for potentially breaching the regulations, because you're meant to like ask a marshal or something to cross even though there's a red flag ongoing. So bit of a strange situation there. That might come to something. Perez also, who shouldn't have even got into Q3, I'm pretty sure, based on the lap that should have been deleted, is probably going to get some sort of grid penalty as well, whether that'll really affect him too much, because he ends up Q4. It's actually Verstappen who takes pole by 3/100ths of a second. It was so tight. Verstappen was actually yellow in the first two sectors, but put together a blinding sector 3, at least for him. Despite going yellow, green, Leclerc had a pretty difficult, I think his first sector, Leclerc was about a 10.5 down. So if Leclerc had a better first sector, he probably would have been on pole here. But yeah, 300ths back. Verstappen takes it in front of the home crowd. Then Sainz, then Perez 4/10ths back. Then Russell, despite, of course, going off on what would have been maybe a slightly better flying lap attempt. Then Ocon, to fair play to him, Alonso was P9. Hamilton, of course, never got to put a representative time in. And then, Magnussen and Schumacher starting P7, P8, right? So yeah, lots of work to be done tomorrow in the sprint race for the Mercedes. Of course, Russell starts in a decent position if he remains there, based on a potentially looming penalty. And Hamilton, of course, with plenty of work to do as well, with Alonso in front of him. It's never going to be easy. But then the two Hasses, we'll see how their race pace looks in a sprint race, because, more than likely it won't be quite as good as their quali was. But that's going to do it for today. Very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new as always. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.